Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me on our webinar this afternoon of how to get out and stay out of debt. My name is Jason Butler, and I'm the Head of Financial Education here at Salary Finance. If you're not aware, Salary Finance is an employee benefit that's available to you, and we're on a mission to get people out of debt and into saving. We offer products including affordable loans, which are repaid through your salary, as well as the ability to save money directly from your wage as well. Now, I just want to make it very clear at the beginning that this webinar is aimed at people who have non-mortgage debts like credit cards, store cards, overdrafts, and term loans, which they're keen to get rid of, but for whatever reason, they've not been able to do so. It's not aimed at people who are suffering severe financial distress, such as facing legal action or having difficulties meeting essential expenditure like rent, mortgage, or other core living costs. If that sounds like you, or you know someone who it does sound like, please contact your local Citizens Advice Bureau and ask to see one of their free money advisors for personal guidance. There's another charity called Step Change, which is also excellent, and they provide help for people in financial distress. Okay, hoping everyone can hear me. Unless there's any problems, I'll assume that's fine. Many years ago, thousands of years ago, there was called the Stoics were philosophers, and they had a sort of approach to life where they said there are only two things that we can control in our lives. One is our attitude, how we react to things, and our actions, what we actually do. And everything else is out of our hands. So whether it's the economy, tax rates, inflation, the health of your company, whatever it is, you can't control that, but you can control how you think and what you do and how you react to things. And that's particularly the case when it comes to our money in general and debt in particular. Now, unless we build a savings reserve, a reservoir of money that we can call on, there's always going to be things that we legitimately need and which aren't luxuries, but we can't afford them from our own resources. And examples of that are, for instance, this is a classic one I see a lot of. You've decided to move rental property, you're renting and you want to move, or the landlord has asked you to move, and you need a deposit for your new property, but you can't get the deposit back from the previous property until you've moved out. So you're in a catch-22 position. This happens quite a lot to young people, young families, or people who've had changes in circumstances. And so therefore, if you haven't got savings and you still need to come up with a deposit, where do you get the money from? And that can cause you to get into expensive debt. If a car is essential for you to get to work and say there isn't public transport if you live in a rural area, then occasionally not just the maintenance of the car, but occasionally repairs that you weren't anticipating come up, and that can really put a spanner in the works. £300 or £400 repairs from nowhere can really throw you off track. And then you've got all the classic home repairs. I remember when we moved into our home 21 years ago, within about 3 months, the boiler went wrong. And even patching it up cost £500. We eventually had to replace it at much more expense, but that can really throw you. Roofing, all sorts of stuff happens. And that's often because people aren't anticipating maintenance repairs. And then there's the classic personal care. I know various people have had to have quite extensive dental work done that they weren't anticipating, and that can come to hundreds, even thousands of pounds. And then there's all the other things, school uniform, work clothes, you name it. So it can all add up. Now, if we borrow for these legitimate things, obviously it's going to cost us interest, and that interest can cost us a lot more than we realise. And in a way, think about interest is actually a penalty that you pay for the right to own, use, or experience something in advance that you can't afford from your own resources now. And this becomes more of an issue if you buy non-essentials, luxuries, things you don't really need. And if you use debt to fund that, then what you're really saying is that you want those things so bad that you're prepared to pay more for them in the form of interest. And examples of that, I mean, this is just an example, a more expensive car than you really need, having holidays. I mean, I know we often sometimes have difficult lives, but, going on a holiday is not necessarily an essential, particularly if you're keen to get out of debt and build savings. Jewellery and fashion items and smartphones that cost £1,000, £1,500, you could buy a second-hand one. So unless you've got ahead, and this is not for me to lecture you about what you should or shouldn't spend your money on, But it's just to say that there is some spending which we don't really need, so there's a difference there. Now, there is a problem in society in that we now live in an age where essentially it's easy to get into debt, and the average UK household, this is just a recent article from The Guardian, says it's it's in excess of £15,000 per household of non-mortgage debt. That's a lot of money. And I think it's come about because our modern culture says debt is what normal people do and they use to fund their consumption. But here's the thing, I don't want you to be normal. In fact, I don't want anyone to be normal. I want you to be completely abnormal. And that comes from thinking about our debt in different ways. So let's now talk about the cost of debt. Now, obviously, if you borrow money from family and friends and they don't charge you interest, that is the cheapest form of borrowing. And as you can see from this graphic here, we go up the gradient from credit unions, payroll-linked loans like salary finances, all the way up to payday loans, unauthorized loans, rent-to-own schemes. That's when you're renting, say, a washing machine, and eventually you'll own it, but you can end up paying 2 or 3 times the cost of the item, and that is a really nasty form of borrowing, all the way up to doorstep lenders. And I hope no one's got involved in that, but that can be really extortionate. So understanding the different types of borrowing, they all have different costs. And there's something worth saying here that if you look at credit cards, store cards, and overdrafts, they are a form of what we call revolving credit, which means that there's no plan to repay them. It's kind of, you can pay the minimum and you may sort of eventually you pay them off, but there's not a structured way of repaying them over a period of time. And that's really what the banks and the credit card companies are really keen to push those products, because they want you to keep that loan, that borrowing, for as long as possible. But as we'll see in a minute, having a structured repayment on fair interest rates can help you hammer that debt and get rid of it. Now, the key to being financially well is getting and staying out of debt. And you've got to break the burden of debt. And that starts and ends with how you think about spending and what's important. Now, the bad news is this is going to involve some short-term pain, and it's going to involve a little bit of focus and effort. But the good news is that pain's well worth the effort. And I just want you to imagine a life without debt and feel and think how you'll feel when you've achieved that. So I just want to make this clear to you, a little bit of disclosure. I grew up in a very poor household. My mum was a single parent. She had 4 children, and she was in debt her whole life. And she never had any money, and she literally struggled from week to week. So I know what it's like to be really, really up against it. And I started to continue those habits that my mother had sort of adopted in my early to mid-20s. And I was a complete and utter train wreck, out of control on spending. I had credit cards, overdrafts, you name it. I did do saving, and I did have a pension and things like that, but it was just nasty. And I got to my sort of about 27, 28, and I decided that things had to change. And this is why I'm so passionate about this, because I know the difference it made in my own life. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, and we are where we are. We can't choose our upbringing. And it really brings to this idea that I want you to also have that epiphany where you've got to see debt as you're going to be moving through. You're going to be disassociating yourself with debt. We'll put aside mortgage debt for a minute, but I'm talking about expensive, unstructured borrowing. And as I put on the thing here, think of it like a relationship that's had its day, that you've had enough of it. You're going to tell debt that it's just not working out between you. You're not right for each other. It's over, and you're going to be moving on. A bit tongue-in-cheek, but you've got to get serious. You can't just see, if you're really serious about becoming debt-free, you've got to make that decision, like I did in my mid to late 20s, and you can and you will be better, and you will get debt-free. And if it still won't go debt, you've got to start getting really, really nasty and really determined. And you've got to be absolutely clear, and you've got to do whatever is necessary. This can be done. There are stories after stories of people who had up to £100,000 worth of credit and overdrafts, etc., and they got free and they became financially independent. So it can be done. And you don't need to rob a bank or win the lottery. In fact, you've got more chance of dying than you have of winning any prize in the lottery in between buying the ticket and the prize draw. Just an interesting fact there. So let's look about the situation of why we get into debt, because it's very important that we nub the problem at the base. Most people think of their spending. If they do think about how much they're spending, the difference between what they think they're spending and what they really are is often there's a disconnect. Okay, and this is the first thing you've got to learn is you've got to face up to reality. So it's not about recriminations or judgments or me hectoring you or lecturing you. It's just saying until you face up to reality, you can't do anything about it. Okay, it's a bit like an alcoholic. Unless you accept you're an alcoholic, you can't do anything about it. So spending, you think it goes in a straight line, but really this is what's happening. Your spending is varying. So there's a core of expenses, which I'll show you in a minute, but this is what's happening. Your spending is not going in a straight line. And what happens is if you've got lots of different expenditures coming in that you hadn't anticipated, and they're beyond what you've got coming in, then you're going to build up this mess on the top here, which is just lots of small overspends, basically cause a tipping point, which leads you to incur debt. And it might start off with an overdraft, and then it's a credit card, and then it's a store card, and then it's a loan, and then it's a this, and then it goes on and on and on. So we've got to break the cycle of what got you into debt in the first place. So again, forget the past. The past is done. You can't do anything about that. This is about a new clean sheet. And the beginning of the tax year is a great time to think about that. You might have a little bit more money coming in because your tax rate's gone down, or national insurance has gone down, or you've had a pay rise, or whatever it is. But this is a real good time to think about it. So let's now think about this in a bit more detail. So let's take this typical example. Your numbers will be different and your categories of spending will be different. This is what someone thinks they're spending a month, okay? In this scenario, it's £2,000 a month. But actually, when we add on all the other things that they spend throughout the year, so in this case, what we've got is clothes that we buy at certain times of the year, the car needs servicing, perhaps repairs, pets. I don't know about you, I've got 2 dogs and we never come out of the vet with less than £100 bill. It only happens once a year, and sometimes it's a couple of £100. We've got to have other things like teeth looked at, but making an allowance for it because it's inevitable, even if we don't know exactly how much. And then we've got holidays, trips. You know, even a friend of mine had a stag do. You know, and that comes to a cost that you may not have been anticipating. And then we've got Christmas and so on. Now, your ad hoc spending may be different from that, but the point I want you to think about is embracing all of that. So in this case, this person's ad hoc spending throughout the year that he or she hasn't thought about is £7,200 is the summation of all those bits on the top. So that means they're spending £2,600 per month. So they need to make a budget or a spending plan for £2,600 and not £2,000. So embrace all your expenses and be absolutely clear. Yes, it's boring. Yes, it's time consuming sitting down doing this, but it's far better to do that even if it took you 2 or 3 hours, because this is the basis on which you're going to get ahead and avoid bad debt in the future. Okay, so what can we do? Well, the first thing to do is something called the CEO approach, and that's easy for you to remember. Think about your boss. The CEO approach involves 3 really simple steps, which are pretty obvious, but they work. First of all, just cut costs. Cut out everything, right? Just to start with. I don't mean live like a monk. I'll come back to this in a minute, but just be ruthless. Do you need 3 streaming services? In fact, do you need any streaming services? Could you do without for 6 months? Do you need that subscription to whatever the magazine you don't read? There's always stuff that you can cut out, which isn't a lot of pain and which you won't miss. Just think about it. You can, if you can't cut your expenses anymore, then you need to earn more. And it may be you do something at the weekend, or you do some overtime, or you help out a friend, or whatever it is. There's always something you can do to earn a little bit more money. Perhaps you can go on a training course to improve your your earnings from employment. And the third thing is optimize the existing spending that you can't do without. So that's things like your broadband, your mobile phone charge, utility, etc. All of those things you need to be looking at regularly. And if you make a list of them, and when they come up for renewal, car insurance is a classic one. No, don't just take the existing renewal. Don't go with the existing thing you've got. You've got to be ruthless. They've got to work for your money each year. And you'd be surprised, just by optimizing your spending, you could trim anything from £300 to £1,000 a year without a huge amount of work. Just think how long it takes you to earn £300 to £1,000 a year. Could be even more, could be a bit less. But think of it as like, if you can cut the spending but just by being a smarter spender, by using a better provider, then you could actually really save money. It's like earning money. But let's just make it really clear. You've got to stop borrowing money, okay? And what you've got to do is give every job £1 to do at the beginning every month, and you've got to embrace your expenses, as I said. Now, this system is called the Smart Spending System. It's a very simple framework. I'll explain it to you. This is available on the Learn part of the Salary Finance website, where we put all our learning material. So you can download this in your own time and look at it. And really, this is the concept. And having ideas that are easy to implement and don't require lots of effort is the key to sustaining them and being effective. And I want you to think of yourself as 3 U's. There's the basic U, which is your core living cost, including mortgage or rent. There's the future you, which is debt repayment and building up savings. And there's the fun you. That's the bit I like most. It's the luxuries, the hobbies, the holidays, the things that make life interesting, socializing. Now, whatever percentage you allocate to these is down to your personal situation. I put these numbers on as just very, very rough ideas. It's not to be strict or say you've got to follow this. But the difference is that when your money comes in, you're already deciding right at the beginning to pay yourself first. And that means all your core living costs are paid out of your main bank account, and your future you, that's debt repayment and savings, all come out on day one. And then the balance is going to go into 2 separate accounts. Now, I'll come back to this in a minute, but the first bit is into your fun account, which is for all the fun stuff. And what you're doing is, I use, for instance, Monzo, and that goes into that account on the second day after I get paid. And then as I'm spending money, my app is telling me all the time what I've got left, what I've spent. So if I spend in the first week, say I put £400 in that, that's £100 a week I've got for fun. I can spend it on anything I want, but if I spend more than £100 in the first week, I need to spend a bit less in the second week. So it's a simpler way of me sort of keeping a track on all those little contact lists and coffees and drinks, etc. But remember, I went back here and I showed you this bit here, this £600 extra that represents all these ad hoc payments. Well, the way to deal with those is to have a third account. So what you're essentially doing is you're putting in a third account those ad hoc payments where they're not monthly, but so you can segregate them and then draw on them when you need them. For instance, Starling Bank allows you to have one bank account but multiple pots, so you could actually simplify your situation if you wanted to. But there are obviously lots of banks out there, and your existing bank may offer you to be able to split your account. So it's segregating your money into sort of 3 U's into 3 pots, 3 bank accounts. Nothing wrong with that if it helps you get control. So there we go. Pay yourself first when it comes to future you and basic you, and then you're spending down to 0 the fun you. And if you have a third account for the ad hoc lumpy expenditure, hopefully you've got more chance of avoiding getting into debt, and you've got resilience. Now, a couple of websites here that are well worth looking at for budgeting. I don't like the word budget. I like the word smart spending, because budget sounds a bit boring, sort of thing accountants do. YouNeedABudget.com is a US company. It has a software system that enables you to build a budget. You do not need to buy their software system, but they do have great tutorials. There are videos, there are all sorts of insights, and they've got 4 concepts of basically give every pound a job to do at the beginning of the month, embrace all your expenses, which is what I've just said. Roll with the punches, be flexible. You don't have to be absolutely rigid. Some months you're going to have a better result than others. And the other thing is age your money. If you can hold on to your money a bit longer, so you're not living paycheck to paycheck, pay day to payday, and you start to build resilience and a bit of savings, you'll never need to go back to borrowing. A UK company that I've been using and working myself with for a number of years is moneydashboard.com. They've got a great app that enables you, it tracks the spending from all your bank accounts. So, you don't have, if you've got several bank accounts like I have, and it enables you to have a sort of global view of what you're spending. But you don't have to use it. I'm just putting it there. There are lots of apps out there. You might find one that works for you, but I'm just saying these have been around a long time, these companies, and they might help you. Now, let's look at the implications of a credit card that we just paid a minimum payment on. Now, if we just pay the minimum payment, then it's going to take us a lot longer to pay something else. So in this case, a £1,000 credit card where we just pay the minimum payment all the time is going to take nearly 16 years to pay off and cost us 3 times the debt. Whereas if we just paid £100 off, forget whether we've got any, we've lowered the cost of the interest. If we just paid £100 a month, we pay it off in 11 months, less than a year. So minimum payments are not a good thing if you want to get rid of debt. But I'll come back and show you something in literally 2 minutes about why minimum payments can work to your advantage. Great website here called whatsthecost.com. Now, whatsthecost.com just is a very simple calculator that enables you to put in the amount of debt you've got, put in the average interest rate or whatever the interest rate is you're paying. And in this case, I put the average credit card balance in the UK and I put the average APR. That's the annual percentage rate. In fact, today the figures came out that showed it's about 19.5%. So it's gone up in the last month. And in this situation, it tells me that if I just pay the minimum payment at that interest rate, I'll pay £7,900 in interest. And it will take me basically the rest of my life. I'm 50 years old. It'll take me till I'm 100 if I live that long. Basically 50 years. Ridiculous. Now, what it then says is I say, okay, well, if I take that same balance and I halve the interest rate, so I put in here the typical APR for a salary finance loan. I'm not saying buy a salary finance loan, but I'm just using our APR because that's the one I've got. That's the typical percentage rate. Some people pay less, some people pay a bit more. And we repay £100 extra a month. We'll repay that loan in 23 months, less than 2 years, and we'll only pay £223 in interest. So lowering the interest, overpaying it on a structured repayment basis is how we hammer it. And another thing is just sell everything you've got. Literally, if you want to get serious about getting out of debt, you've got to sell everything. You've got to sell, you've got to be so fervent about getting rid of stuff that you don't need or want. If you've got kids, they've got to feel like they're the next one's going to be put on eBay. That's how serious you've got to get with this. And everyone has got somewhere between £800 to £2,000 worth of took and clutter that they don't need that they could sell. And that is a way of dampening the debt. And you know what? You'll feel great as a result of doing this. I had a pile of bricks out in my driveway for 4.5 years as a result of a building job. And I live in a very old house, so these are reclaimed bricks. And I sold them on eBay and got £400 for them. £400 that was just sitting there doing nothing, all because I couldn't be bothered to take a picture and put them on eBay. So I'm not perfect. So, you know, just look in your loft, look in that spare room, look in the garage, whatever it is, look in those drawers. There's something somewhere you've got to sell. Okay, now, this is the hard way to repay debt. If you've got multiple debts, then the typical way is we're putting, you know, all the different amounts into this, then it can really feel like a struggle that you can't get rid of the debt. And this is because, you know, ideally what you should be doing is putting the most money into the debt that's got the highest interest rate, okay? But if that's the largest debt, it can be soul destroying because you feel like you're not making progress. And psychologically, we need to feel that we're making progress, even if we've not finished the journey. So the snowball debt repayment method has been around for many years, and the concept is you reorganize the debt so you've got the smallest debt first and the largest debt last, even if the largest debt has got the highest interest rate. And you notice here that we were paying £200 a month. We've tried and come up with a little bit extra, but the extra we can come up with needs to be sustainable. You don't want to start putting 150 quid a month if you can only afford 50. And you put everything else on minimum payments. And in this case, the blue one, the 150, and put the bulk of our repayment, which includes the £50 extra we found, to hammer in that first debt. We get that debt out of the way, and then we add what we were paying into that blue debt into the brown debt, so the grey debt. And then we put all of that money. So we're always doubling up, we're always directing the same amount into the next debt, until we are completely free of expensive borrowing. And then, and this is the beauty, and we're seeing this now with people who've got salary finance loans, they're coming to the end of their loan and they were adopting better habits on spending. And now they're actually saying, no, I'd like to have my £250, my £100, my £80, my £50, whatever it was. I would like to continue having that deducted from my savings, from my salary, and having that put into a savings account. And we offer, depending on your employer, whether they offer it, and even if your employer doesn't offer it, just, you know, you could start up a direct debit with an external savings company. So what you haven't had, you don't miss. And that's really, really important. And then you can build your savings. And the more savings you've got, the more buffer you've got, the more resilience you've got, the more options you've got. And you can cope with these left beam expenses. Make sense? Now, so that's the snowball method does work. Now, it's worth saying, if you've ever done anything, whether it's dieting, going to the gym, anything that requires a bit of effort and changing habits and routines, it's easier to do that with someone else. I call it an accountability partner. And there is a big problem with money in that it's a taboo. People would rather tell you about their sex life than they would, or their latest holiday, than they would talk about their money situation. And there's a whole host of issues. We're embarrassed, we feel guilty, we feel shame, we feel, you know, that perhaps other people would judge us. Well, if you could find a friend, a relative, or a colleague who has also wants to make some changes in their life, they may not have the same financial challenges as you, They might not have the same priorities as you, but if you could share together in a safe way and be each other's sort of money buddy, you could actually help encourage each other and build in treats as well. So that, for instance, when we look back at that, paying back that, each time you pay off a loan, perhaps have a little treat and go out with your friend, or treat yourself to something. Nothing over the top, but just something small that every time you meet those milestones, you're rewarding yourself. Okay, and if you've got an accountability partner, a chum, or a friend, they can help, and you can help them as well. And there will be times when you fall off the wagon spending wise. There'll be times when you let yourself down. But that doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're a bad or nasty person. It just means you're trying to make changes to your life, and they require effort. You can be like everyone else and keep debt in your life, or you go back and make that commitment that you did before. It's over, okay? So let's look at a couple of case studies just before we can take some questions at the end. So do think if you've got any questions, please put them on the questionnaire thing, and I'll try and get to them as quick as I can. So let's have a look here. We've got Gary and Leanne. They had £9,800 of unsecured debts costing 20% APR. Now, Gary earns $33,000 and Leanne earns $26,000, quite a good income. They've opted out of the pensions, they couldn't afford payments, and they felt overwhelmed and stressed about their finances. So this is what they did. They sold off possessions and clutter and stuff that they didn't need, and they turned that into £800 of cash, and they used that to hammer one of their debts. They refinanced £5,000 of the debt to a salary-linked instalment loan, and they halved the interest and greatly reduced the repayment period. They took some part-time work at the weekend to generate £100 per month net extra income. They adopted the snowball debt repayment method, and they directed the bulk of that extra income, not all of it, but most of it, to repaying their debt. They rejoined the pension scheme so that they got the free money from their employer and the government, and they're now on track to repay all their debts within 3 years. But here's the point, also to still enjoy life and not feel like they're in a straitjacket, okay? You do not have to go cold turkey on this. Now we've got Gabby. She's got £3,200 of unsecured store card debt costing 22.5% APR, with minimum monthly payments being paid. She earns £24,000, but she seems overdrawn at the end of most months, and she's got no savings. So this is what she did. She replaced the store card debt with a salary-linked loan costing her 11% APR. She put in place the smart spending plan, which included £400 per month for fun. So remember what I said, sustainable, and you've still got to enjoy life. Otherwise, you won't keep with it. And she's now on track to repay her debt within 19 months, and she feels in control for the first time in her working life. Now, Ian earns £29,000. He's got a persistent overdraft of £2,200. He's a single parent in rented accommodation, and he's got quite high childcare costs. He's got no savings and a credit card balance of about $1,500 on a minimum repayment, and that really is kind of weighing him down. So this is what he did. He made a claim for universal credit, and that increased his income by £125 per week because of the childcare element. He replaced the overdraft on the credit card with a lower cost salary deducted loan. He implemented the CEO and the smart spending system, including embracing all of his expenses and putting those in the third account. And here's an interesting thing. Because he's now claiming universal credit, he's entitled to open a new savings account, which is from the government, called Help to Save. And that attracts a 50% tax-free bonus on whatever he saves in at the end of 2 years and at the end of 4 years. He doesn't have to keep paying in £50 a month. He can vary it. He can take the money out, and there's no risk to him. And that is actually a better use of his money than some of his debt he's got. And he's now on track to be completely debt-free within 18 months and have savings for the first time ever. So, don't suffer in silence. So, in order to help you, obviously a limit to what I can do in a webinar, in order to help you, we've created through the Salary Finance Learn portal, and ask your employer if you're not sure where this is. We've created a series of videos. We have season 1, which is all about the basics, all very short videos where I explain to you the simple baby steps you can take. Season 2 is about creating personal wealth. We've created a series of really easy to read guides. We've got checklists, we've got tools, we've got calculators, all sorts of stuff to help you. There's no thousands of blogs to read if you don't want to read them. It's really simple stuff to help you be better with money. That's me finished. I don't know if we've got any questions. Let's have a look. Okay, we've got one question here. Okay. I'm quite good with budgeting, but my partner isn't so good, and that seems to be causing tension and problems. And that's from Abigail. Well, Abigail, there is a problem for most people in that relationship mismatches in how we think about money and our money habits do happen in a lot of relationships. And it's often because we're not communicating properly. We're all different. We've all got a different money story, a different values from growing up. But it's like anything in any relationship. If it's not working, it's generally speaking because we're not communicating properly. And what I suggest you do is this: you first of all get the reality by going through your expenditures. And I suggest that you sit down, find a safe time where it's good for the two of you to sit down and approach this in a non-judgmental, non-aggressive, non-threatening way, and just sort of tease out of your partner, just show them what the reality is in a gentle way, and ask them what's important to them, and explain if you've got debt, for instance, you're trying to get rid of. Then I would suggest that what you do is you say, look, how would we feel? What difference would it make to us as individuals and as a family and to our financial situation if we could be free of debt, if we could get control of our spending, if we could build up savings? Because it's getting connection with that emotional feeling that will make the biggest difference. And I would suggest really that you do that and do that regularly. So there we go. Okay, what have we got here? Michael's got a question. He's got some expensive debt. He's borrowed some money for his mum and dad for a deposit. They're asking when he can get the money back, when they're going to get their money back, and he's feeling under pressure. Well, here's the thing, Michael. I think if you sit down with your mum and dad and you set out a plan and show them how you've got control of your spending, how you are going to get rid of the expensive debt and why it's important for you to get rid of it, whether you refinance that debt or put it on a repayment basis or a salary deduction arrangement, then I think they're more likely to be more amenable to waiting for you to repay that money. So hopefully that helps you there. Someone's said here, how do I repair I've got a poor credit score. How do I repair that? Who's that from? Anil. Okay, Anil. Well, if you've got a poor credit score, it's quite a long story. There is actually some stuff on the Learn website that explains to you how to repair your credit score. There's a company called ClearScore that's got some good videos on this. But essentially what you have to do is you have to reduce the amount that you're using of each of your credit cards or overdraft facilities. You've got to make sure you're paying your payments. You've got to make sure you're registered on the voting roll. You've got to make sure that you are basically a good bet for someone. And that just takes time. And it may even be you need to check your record and see if you were living in an address where there previously were people who had bad credit scores, or you had an ex-partner who had bad credit scores. So you need to get your credit score, look at your record, see what's on it, and as I say, reduce your overall amount you've got on credit cards. And you might be able to do that with a salary link loan. Okay, well, that's it. So unless there are any other questions, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been great having you on here on the webinar, and I hope to see you on another webinar. And here's the thing, if you get clear of your debt or you make progress, get in touch with me because I'd love to hear your success stories. Thanks very much for joining us.